Good evening and welcome to Q&A, live from the Dockland studios in Melbourne. We're one day closer to a looming election with just a million to go. I'm Tony Jones and here to answer your questions tonight, Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews, Bank of Melbourne Chair Elizabeth Proust, Independent Tasmanian Senator Jackie Lambie, the Minister for Resources and Energy Josh Frydenberg, and feminist commentator and social media activist Clementine Ford. Please welcome our panel. Now, don't forget, depending on your time zone, Q&A is either live on ABC TV or ABC News 24. It's simulcast on News Radio across Australia. Well, Malcolm Turnbull's announcement that we're on track for an early election and a likely double dissolution has reshaped tonight's program. Let's go to our first question. It comes from Susan South.
My question is to Senator Jackie Lambie. Senator, how will the Prime Minister's decision today to recall Parliament to push the Australian Building and Construction Commission legislation through the Senate affect your vote, taking into consideration that a no vote could cost you your position?
Jackie Lambie.
Well, first of all, when it comes to legislation, I always vote on it depending on its own merits, so I want to make sure that's quite clear. Look, I've spent a lot of time on the ABCC. I've also spoken to the Law Council of Australia on numerous occasions. They have problems with this. As a matter of fact, pretty much what they're saying is it has more holes in it than the target at the shooting range. So that, I have a problem with that. It's taking away, you know, your civil basic rights, which is another issue. I also, one of the biggest problems I've had through all of this, I was one of the lucky ones to see the secret reports that they've all been talking about, and I can tell you now...
Talking about Dyson Heydon's secret volume of the Royal Commission.
That's right, so I'm talking about the Royal Commissioner Heydon and his secret reports, and the thing what stunned me, I've been corresponding with him over the last 12 months and asking him questions as he's been going along. The thing that really opened my eyes up when he said to me, this is a grave threat to the power, or grave threats to the power and authority of the Australian state. So I was thinking, oh my God, what are in these secret volumes? Well, after going into the room to have a look at the secret volumes, I can tell you in just over an hour I came out of there and I was absolutely flabbergasted. I don't know what the Royal Commissioner is trying to pull here, but there is nothing that even resembles anything. There's a grave threat to the power and the authority of the Australian state. So whether he has misled the people or he has lied to you, I can tell you what is contained in those secret reports. There is nothing there that is not normal that happens on the outside and in other places, whether that's even what's going on in our banking and finance sector, whether it's going on in our sport. You know, so for $80 million, I have to ask what the Australian people have actually received here, and I'll tell you what I have seen, and I'll speak a lot more about this obviously on the floor in Parliament, what I have seen has been very disappointing for $80 million of your taxpayers.
Can we take it, Jackie Lambie, that you will be voting no?
I will be voting
ABCC.
no to the ABCC. I'll be quite honest like that. I will not be blackmailed. I will not have a gun held to my head. This is not the way to play politics. And as for my seat, well, that is up to the people of Tasmania. Now, if they don't want me up here keeping the bastards honest, then they'll get rid of me. If that's what they want from me, then I'll be safe.
Josh Frydenberg, sounds like you've got your work cut out for you, unless you want a double dissolution election, in which case you've targeted this quite well.
Well, look, Jackie Lambie's been entirely consistent with her previous positions on the ABCC, but we see this as an important economic reform. You have to understand that it came out of the Cole Royal Commission. It was instituted by the Howard government. Labor dismantled it. Bill Shorten abolished it in 2012. It was an effective cop on the beat and an important sector of the economy. We now want to bring it back. 1 million Australians are employed in the building and the construction sector, but 2/3 of the industrial disputes in our country are in that building and construction sector. And since the ABCC was abolished, there has been a 34% increase in those disputes. So this goes right at the heart of the productivity of the Australian economy, about incentivising investment. Now, Dyson Heydon is one of Australia's most eminent jurists. He was actually appointed by a Labor government in New South Wales to the bench. He found that there was a systemic and deep cultural problem within the union movement of lawlessness, and he's referred more than 70 matters for further legal activity. I think this is extremely important, and the Prime Minister now, in a very decisive act, has put the pressure back on the Senate.
All right, to the politics of this very briefly. Some of the crossbench senators, you would need 6 of them to pass it. Some of them are saying they might consider passing it with amendments. Jackie Lambie not amongst those apparently, but some of them are saying with amendments. Are you prepared to amend the legislation in April?
Well, Michaelia Cash, who's the Minister responsible and has been a staunch advocate for this reform, has said that she's prepared to negotiate in good faith. So we're not closing down any doors, but what we're saying is that this goes to the heart of the future of the Australian economy. It is just absolutely critical that we rid this sector of the lawlessness that we've seen. The CFMEU here in Victoria have run amok.
Are you prepared to amend the legislation? Well, send it back to the House of Representatives and then subsequently back to the Senate in April? That's the question.
Well, Tony, I'm not going to preempt those discussions because I don't know what the amendments that are being proposed are.
But you wouldn't rule out amending it and sending it back up to the Senate, which would mean quite a few days possibly in April, not just one.
Well, Michaelia Cash has said she's not ruling out any changes, but she will negotiate in.
So you could sit for a number of days?
Well, the Prime Minister has put 3 weeks there for the Senate, which is a suitable amount of time.
All right, Daniel Andrews, you've been listening to this?
Well, it's interesting to have the Prime Minister calling an election, like no Prime Minister's ever done that before, called a decisive act. It's not a decisive act, this is politics. This is a bit of a half-smart wedge, frankly. I've got more faith, perhaps, than Josh and others in the Victoria Police, the Australian Federal Police. Anyone who's done the wrong thing should feel the full force of the law. We don't need a special one-out, particularly expensive watchdog to do that. And your own Productivity Commission, Josh, found that it had very little impact when it was there and very little impact afterwards.
Elizabeth Proust, do you have a different view on the need for the ABCC? It's been in place under the Howard government.
Tony, I think Clementine and I are the only 2 non-politicians on the panel. I think if I stand back and say what are the key issues that are facing our country today, I think the ABCC would be somewhere down that list. Important. We need to ensure that there is the rule of law on building sites and in unions, but is it the biggest issue that we're facing? I don't think so.
So not a big enough issue to trigger an emergency election, a double dissolution election, in your view?
I wouldn't have thought so.
Clementine?
Look, I'm inclined to agree. I think that, for me, caring about the ABCC is so far down on my list of priorities. But not only that, what concerns me more about it is the fact that it seems like a really obvious ploy to vacate the Senate in order to install a new Senate that maybe will be a little bit more open to dealing with the government. I mean, there's no secret that independent senators have been a bit of a thorn in the side of both sides of politics, really. And for me, I feel like if it can be that easy to actually manipulate the system in order to change it so that it functions and fashions to support not only old parties but support traditional politics and traditional ways of doing things, and that's something I'm much more concerned about than whether or not we have a watchdog.
All right, our next question actually goes to this. It's to you, Josh Frydenberg, so I won't bring you in now. It's from Catherine Campbell.
Hi, Josh. Can you please explain to us how strong-arming the Senate into accepting your ABCC legislation by holding the threat of a double dissolution over their heads is a fair expression of democracy, given that the majority of your legislation presented to the Senate has been passed? Is an obstruction a Senate, or is it just the government's inability to negotiate that's holding up your policy delivery?
Well, Section 57 of the Constitution provides for resolving of deadlocks, namely when a piece of legislation has twice gone before both houses of Parliament, and in the upper house it's been blocked. That's what we are looking at here when it comes to the ABCC, and we already have that trigger when it comes to the registered organisations. Elizabeth said that there are more important issues in Australia. I'm sure if you sampled this room, there would be a lot of other issues that people would raise. But actually, the cost of building your hospitals, the cost of building your commercial businesses, and if they go up, it's passed on to you, the consumer. The cost of residential housing is all linked to the productivity in the construction sector. So that's why this is absolutely critical. Now, we have had 2 royal commissions that have found real problems in this sector, and the CFMEU here in Victoria have run amok because they've paid more fines here than in any other state. The next larger number of fines that they've paid is in Western Australia, which is only a third of what they paid here in Victoria.
Josh, I'm going to interrupt you there. The question has a hand up. I'm going to go back to Catherine. Obviously, this is going to be a key issue when people have to decide whether it's worth going to election on it. Let's hear what Catherine says about your response.
One of the things that concern me is more about the amendments as well. I've seen people from across the parliament say that they're quite willing to accept some kind of corruption commission. The issue they have is the scope of the commission that you're actually presenting. Would you really be willing to amend this so at least it covers more than one specific aspect of one industry?
Well, like I said, Michaelia Cash, who's the minister responsible, is now going to enter into those negotiations with the crossbenchers, and we'll have 3 weeks of the Senate sittings potentially to negotiate this, and she will approach it in good faith. But we're not going to end up with a piece of legislation which is Swiss cheese. We're actually going to deliver on what the Royal Commission had approved of, and contrary to what Daniel said, what the Productivity Commission has ticked off on, and contrary to what Elizabeth said, what big business and small business and others have been calling for, this is a key economic agenda item for the Turnbull government.
I was going to throw to Jackie Lambie on that, just you, and then we'll go to our next question.
So, yeah, you're right on the button, and so most other Australians, because what it needs is a national ICAC. What they've done is taken out a minority instead of looking at the majority of corruption that's going on around Australia. And like I said before, whether that's banks, politics, sports, in our Defence Force, and that's what should be sitting at the top, looking at everything, not just a small amount of it. That's the first thing. The second thing is we have not been obstructionists. Over 75% of the legislation has been put through the Senate. We've done $30 billion worth of savings, and the $32 billion that are still sitting there, they are still sitting there and refuse to put them through because they will hit those that are sitting, those people that are on or below the poverty line, and that's exactly who that will sit. The only thing they're taking to this election, and I'll tell you now, is they will increase the GST. Okay, they will increase the GST. They're going after our Medicare system, and they're going to chip away at that like they've already tried with the $7 co-payment, $650 million out of their pathology cuts.
They'd have to have another election to increase the GST, wouldn't they? Because no one would do that without a mandate.
Do you know what? The Liberal Party can go and do what it wants, and if it has the majority in both houses, I'll tell you what, Australia, you're in trouble. You're in real trouble. And anybody that's sitting on or below that poverty line, you're finished.
I'm going to go to our next question. It's from Nathan Fioretti.
Hi, my question is for our Premier, Daniel Andrews. Over the last few days, the ALP has been damning the Greens for counting on coalition votes to pass changes to Senate voting arrangements. This reform has been Greens' policy for around 12 years now. And yet your party colleagues appear to be hell-bent on going after them and labelling this a dirty deal. Even better than that, many of them actually supported this reform until not so long ago. Daniel, you have voiced your opinions on issues before that didn't sit so well against your party's national agenda. What are your thoughts on the changes? Do you see how they actually improve our democracy?
Well, thanks, Nathan. It's an important question, and I'm sure Jackie and others will have comments on this as well. But look, the former Liberal Premier of Victoria offered me the same deal. He offered me a deal just a couple of weeks before the 2014 state election, and I said no. I think we do better. And we're proof positive of that. If we've got more voices representing lots of different groups, lots of different perspectives, it makes you work harder to win the argument. And I think, you know, I'm well known for working with people, and that's exactly what we've done over this last year and a half. We've passed, you know, everything of significance has gone through the upper house. We've got shooters, sex party MPs, we've got the Greens, of course, independents, DLP. This notion that you can't work unless you've got a majority in both houses, well, Victoria puts the lie to that. The last time the Conservatives or a government had a majority in both houses in the federal parliament, well, we got work choices, and I don't think anyone was particularly pleased with that. You've got to work with people. I'm not one for going after the Greens. I'll go after their policies, absolutely, and I'll call out wherever I can the fact that they're more often than not running a commentary on the sidelines instead of actually delivering outcomes for people who, without a good government, never get the life opportunities they are entitled to.
Can I just pick you up on that? Surely in government you wouldn't welcome a situation where people with a handful of votes can get to hold the balance of power in your upper house due to the efforts of vote whisperers and very complex preference deals. This is what the reform is dealing with. Do you really think it's a bad reform?
Well, I think you're getting very close to this line where, you know, did the community get it right or did the community get it wrong? I take the view that when it comes to elections, whether it's every 3 years or every 4 years, the community never gets it wrong.
But do you think, in this case, do you really think the community had any idea that you could get a senator delivered with 500 primary votes?
Well, I'm not here to advocate on behalf of small parties. That's not really my job.
Seem to be doing it.
Well, I'm very keen to make sure... what I'm doing and what I do every day is work with the upper house that the Victorian community gave to me, and I'd encourage Malcolm Turnbull and Josh and others to work more effectively with the Senate that the Australian people gave them. As far as I can see, the Senate, with Labor Party votes and the votes of others, have stopped Medicare co-payments, have stopped enormous cutbacks. Remember all those cutbacks? No cuts to health, no cuts to education. The Senate has been a break against that. How's that a bad thing? How's that a bad thing at all?
Elizabeth Prowse, what do you think? Good reform, bad reform?
I think it's good reform. I think I think that I hear what the Premier's saying in relation to having all voices, but with the preference whisperers and what happened in the Senate last time around, I think it doesn't represent the Australian people, and I think it was an overdue reform which I would support.
Clementine Ford, what do you think?
I think that there are reasons to reform the Senate voting system, of course. You know, I consider myself to be an educated, politically engaged person, possibly more so than many other people and less so than others. But, I mean, even I get flummoxed looking at that long, long list of people to vote for. And I think that if you're not engaging people in the proper way, and if you're not engaging them in a way that they feel like they're a part of the system as opposed to being confused by it, then you run into problems. But I also vehemently reject installing any kind of system which makes it possible for only members of traditional parties to become members of the Parliament, because I think that, as Daniel says, I think that diversity is really important. It's very clear to me that the idea of meritocracy is a complete myth. People who say that we're living in a meritocracy and that people who have merit are elected to the Parliament. I mean, even if you take out the fact... Sorry, Josh, but take out the fact that Peter Dutton is our immigration minister, and that, to me, signals a complete denial of the fact that we live in a meritocracy. But even if you take that out, it's simply not true that people with the most merit are elected into government. All of the people who are elected into government, particularly with the major parties, are done so in preference deals amongst the party rooms themselves. That is all decided before the voters even go to the polls. So for me, it is important to have reforms to make the system more accessible to people. It's important to make it something that they can actually engage with intellectually. But I'm very opposed to making it easier for people who come from traditional party backgrounds to be able to dominate and freeze out that diversity of voices.
Jackie Lambie, what do you think? Because, you know, in reality, and particularly if Michael Kroger is right, you might end up with a number of Senate seats in Tasmania, so it's hardly going to be freezing you out if that turns out to be the outcome.
Oh, with a double D coming up, I tell you what, it's like a Tats Lotto draw on a Saturday night. She'll be open. Looking forward to that.
It's a much smaller quota, though. You've got a more than even chance.
Yeah, I think, look, we do need electoral reform. I think we've all come to the conclusion, is this the right fit? I don't think so. Something that was rushed through, and I know that they said, oh, we've been sort of doing bits and pieces over the last 2 years, but then all of a sudden it was sitting in front of us. You know, I felt like that was a bit of an ambush. There was some massive issues brought up during that 36-hour marathon that we ran. One of the biggest one was the compulsory 1 to 6 above and below the line, and apparently you can get away with just voting one. They've told me that there'll be no criminal charges if you want to give out how to vote cards. It just says vote 1 the JLN, vote 1 the JLN, that's right. And or you can put vote 2 whoever you want next to you. So
can you not turn
that's
this
a bit of a problem.
I'm
working on it. I don't get freebies very often.
By the way, the JLN is the Jackie Lambie Network.
Yes, it is.
Is it still going to be the Jackie Lambie Network? Are you happy to have your name associated with a political party? Same way that Clive Palmer had his name associated with a party?
No, after this election we're going to look at hopefully changing to something like the Australian Independent Network, because look, it's just easy because I have that brand name now. I don't have enough time to change it over. I've only had a short period of time, but as soon as I can offload Jackie Lambie out of it, I'll be very grateful for that. I just think it opens it right up for anybody. They'll feel more comfortable walking into a network and having a fair go at politics. The other thing is, in amongst all this, with this being called and a double D maybe, there may also still be a High Court challenge. Okay, this is going to turn into absolute chaos. It will turn the country into turmoil. So the next few months are going to be critical. And really, I can't tell you exactly where it's all going to go, but it's looking really messy. If that High Court challenge gets up and moves quickly, then this next election, it's going to be all over the show, and that scares me. That's not good democracy.
Josh Frydenberg, you must have been anticipating that possibility.
Look, we know that Bob Day is challenging this, but we're very confident of the constitutional grounds here. You have to understand that this change to the Senate voting system came out of an extended report by a parliamentary inquiry. It was bipartisan. The Labor Party's spokesman on these issues, the Shadow Minister Gary Gray, and Alan Griffin supported it. When Gary Gray had a differing view to the caucus down the track, they removed him from that position. 96.5% of Australians who vote above the line. But you get a situation, for example in Victoria, where Ricky Mule got 0.5% of the vote and he got a seat in the Senate, whereas Nick Xenophon in South Australia got 25% of the vote and he also only just got 1 seat. So you really have...
Would you have a double dissolution, you might get 3.
Absolutely right.
So you'll have a brand new crossbench, maybe as many crossbenches, but from different parties.
But you're basically empowering the individual to choose where their preferences go, because when people previously, Clementine, voted, they would just write 1, but they didn't know where all their preferences went.
OK, look, I'm going to move this on because we've got quite a lot of questions to get through. The next one is from Elizabeth Chacko.
I'm 19 and this is my first overall election to vote. And this year started with the exciting induction of Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister, bringing with him the innovation age. But things have been sort of stagnant since then. The defunding of the Safe School programs, defiance against negative gearing policy, and ministers dropping off one by one. And these are all issues that affect young people and no doubt noticed by young people. So for first-time voters like me, what can the Liberal Party offer? And what is the price the party is paying for backbench politics?
I'll start with Clementine Ford.
Well, at the moment, I don't really feel like there's much that can be offered at all. And, you know, the last time I was on this show, which was also the first time I was on this show, I sat next to Malcolm Turnbull and I made a cheeky joke about when are you going to challenge for the opposition leadership? Because at the time, the backlash against Tony Abbott was so massive, and for me, I really felt like he was such a negative influence in the political sphere and also personally as a woman. And I think that we all had these high hopes that Malcolm Turnbull would be elected and that everything would change. And so I feel not only incredibly disappointed that that hasn't happened, but also disappointed that I was naive enough to think that it would happen. And it upsets me that a first-time voter like yourself could already be disillusioned with a system that's taken me 15 years longer to become disillusioned with. And the fact is that Malcolm Turnbull was a very smooth operator. It was a very convenient position for him to be in being able to challenge Tony Abbott and be that kind of cool new party leader. But as it turns out, it seems to me that he has no conviction on anything. He's played his hand both ways for everyone. He's played the hand of being, very pro-women and, making a statement against men's violence against women. And at the same time, the $100 million that they announced for funding was not anywhere near the $300 million that Tony Abbott took away from funding. It didn't refund women's refuges. He can pose at Mardi Gras with his wife and pretend that he's all part of the glitter cannon brigade. But at the same time, he's not doing anything other than saying, well, we'll have a plebiscite. But even beyond that, this is the issue that I'm most passionate about talking about tonight, is that I can understand why for a lot of LGBT advocates and LGBT people, the issue of same-sex marriage was really just kind of a conservative foil. Because actually, the real issue, one of the major issues facing LGBT people is the high rate of poor mental health and the high rate of suicide rates. And the fact that Malcolm Turnbull has, for no reason, not for a saving of money, not for any other reason other than appealing to the right wing of his party and the rabid right wing of his party, has gutted the Safe Schools Coalition when he could have could have really showed some backbone in that area and really put his weight behind that. I mean, this is a program that Daniel can speak to. This program has been
Clementine, we're going to come to that issue specifically later, but let me just quickly put this to you. I mean, a lot of people are saying this is a chance for Malcolm Turnbull to get a mandate, to go to the election and to have a mandate so that Malcolm can be Malcolm. That's what people are saying. You don't think there's any possibility? I'll throw that around to the other panellists, but quickly, a quick answer.
What does that mean? We're always being told that another time, we have to wait for change, we have to wait for change. It's not time yet. When will it be time for change? When will it be the time for the kind of change that will not just allow same-sex attracted people to get married, but that actually will stop LGBT people from killing themselves?
All right. Elizabeth Proust. Before we hear from Josh, I want to hear from the other panellists just to get a sense around that question. Do you feel a sense of disappointment about what's happened since Malcolm Turnbull became Prime Minister?
If I speak both personally and as a member of the business community, yes, there is disappointment. I think there was great expectation when he was elected in September last year that it was almost a change of government, and it felt partly like that. I think the fact that so much has been ruled out in the lead up to the election, and not just tax reform, I think is disappointing. And I think, to Elizabeth's point about 19-year-old voting for the first time this year, I'm of the baby boomer generation. I was educated pre-HECS. Buying a house was relatively easy. And I think these are very different times. And I do think that we have to have a national conversation, for want of a better term, about the economy, about sharing the cake, about making sure that the country continues to grow and prosper, so that everybody is assisted with that. And I think that when I talk to young people, not just the issues that Clementine's raising, but a raft of issues, buying your first home, paying back HECS debt, those sorts of issues, very much on people's minds.
Do you think, is there any sense from people of your generation, that and within the business community, that perhaps the whole housing boom went too far because negative gearing changes would tend to bring down house prices? And of course that's the accusation being made against the Labor Party, that their policy would do exactly that. Are we in a situation now where it's the people who have houses versus the people who don't?
I think there's a fair bit in that. I'm not sure it was just negative gearing that has done that. It's a part of the
negative gearing in combination with capital gains tax.
Capital gains tax. The fact that we all want to live in cities and really close to the centre has pushed up prices as well. Access to public transport. So that's a big part of it. But I think buying a first home today for most people is really, really difficult.
Daniel Andrews, can you speak to the question, really, which was about Malcolm Turnbull, the promise of Malcolm Turnbull, and now we're going to an election, the reality?
Well, Elizabeth spoke about a sense of stagnation, that things had not unfolded as we were told they would. And look, there was, all of us, I think, almost regardless of party politics, the more positive tone was a good thing. Speaking up to people, speaking to people with an assumed sense that people are smart, because they are. That sense of let's be agile and all that positive language, but it's not been backed up with anything. We haven't seen investment, we haven't seen any significant policy announcements, we've seen a number of retreats, and then we see this really quite, well, I don't know whether it's dangerous, but it's disappointing, the notion that, well, we used to have a leather jacket on and we were for climate change action, we were for different constitutional arrangements, Australia proudly taking its place in the world republic. We used to be supportive of a whole range of minority groups, those who need the protection and the decency that only a good government can offer, and now we're seeing all sorts of policy decisions that don't make any sense. If you're for things, be for them, be consistent, and do some things. Get on and do some things. That's what national leadership is about. And I think there is a growing sense of disappointment that the positive words, I like the way he talks, I like the way a lot of the things he says, but he hasn't been doing very much. He hasn't been doing very much at all. Abbott had to go. This is probably the best way to do it. Tony Abbott had to go. These are Malcolm Turnbull's own words, because the government didn't have an economic plan. Well, 6 months later, where's the economic plan? The budget's been moved forward a week. The budget's happening a week early. That's not an economic plan.
No, that is a political plan. Now, Josh Frydenberg, Can you talk to this idea that Malcolm Turnbull promised but didn't deliver? The idea been delivered by our questioner.
Well, leadership is the combination of continuity and change, and there were some things that Tony Abbott did extremely well and put some building blocks in there in which we're all the beneficiaries, like the free trade agreements that he struck. We're now reaping the benefits of those. Malcolm Turnbull becomes Prime Minister. He's a self-made person. He's had a background in the startup industry, and what does he do? He announces $1 billion plus innovation policy, which has been overwhelmingly welcomed by industry. Now, he's taken on some pretty tough vested interests, whether it's in media reform and changes that hadn't been undertaken before.
Well, the business community, by the sound of it?
The business community on Section 46, which is the changes to competition law, which were deeply opposed by the business community, but we sided with small business, and we think we've got a good policy there which will boost jobs and productivity and innovation. Obviously, Senate reform, that's a pretty tough one, and he's come through that as well with success. His defence white paper will set this country up for the next 10 years because it's more money and a focus on innovation on the defence industry. So I think there's actually a lot of things happening. Now, what matters to the people in this room, of course, are some of these social policies, but it's also levels of employment. Because if we don't have a job, no one's going to pay for the hospitals, no one's going to pay for the schools. Now, we created 300,000 jobs last year, and our economic growth at 3%, Tony, is higher than in the United States, higher than in the UK.
Sounds like Tony Abbott did have an economic plan, because that can't have happened overnight.
No. These changes, this is incremental changes, and it's just happened over time, and we are now seeing a very strong Australian economy. I mean, people in this audience would know we're in our 25th year of consecutive economic growth.
Can I just on the politics of this?
Does that mean that there was economic growth while Labor were in power then?
Sure, absolutely.
Just wanted to establish that.
Absolutely, there are some good Labor leaders. I mean, Bob Hawke.
Josh Frydenberg, the question of a mandate has come up. It came up. Arthur Sinodinos actually raised it yesterday on The Insiders, and he said that if he'll have a stronger mandate if he wins an election, his new government would have the capacity to stamp its authority on all sorts of issues, presumably issues which he hasn't been able to stamp his authority on up until now. How important is it for him to have his own mandate to start with?
Well, from my perspective, he got his mandate when he was selected by the party room as the leader, and that was last year. Now, his position on marriage equality hasn't changed. His position on climate change hasn't changed. I mean, it might surprise you, but we actually think, you know, the plebiscite or the positions we've got that we took to Paris for the climate change talks, we're proud of those and we'll defend them every day. But, you know, Malcolm Turnbull is still the optimistic leader, the innovative leader that Australia needs and wants.
But is Arthur Sinodinos right that in actual fact an electoral mandate is what he needs at the moment to stamp his authority on a range of different issues?
Well, let's just see what happens with the election, but we're confident we'll win it. We'll take policies that we'll implement after the election and we'll let the Australian people make that choice.
Will things be different, though, after the election? I mean, given, well, we could go back to our questioner there to see whether she's convinced by all of this, but would things be different after the election?
Well, there will be some issues that will come to a head, like the plebiscite that we'd hold after the election. So I actually think there's continuity in the policy between now and after the election.
I think a very divisive... No, Clementine, go.
I just want to say something very quickly, and that just goes back to this idea of people being politically disengaged, and it's obviously not a new story. But one of the other things that we always hear is that we will address these things after the election. So it seems like for a first-time voter that to address things constantly after the election. I mean, it makes me actually feel very sad that you're sitting here and saying Malcolm Turnbull's position on climate change and same-sex marriage hasn't changed. And yet, obviously...
Why is that sad?
I think that it's sad that it hasn't changed, and yet his conviction to deliver those things has changed.
Well, Clementine, can we just go back to a questioner who started this, first-time voter, Elizabeth Jacko. Elizabeth, listening to this, is your mind changing in the way you're thinking about it?
I think I'm just concerned that we're forgetting about these issues that could create a lot of change and then putting them down the priority list. Like, I think that's the reason why a lot of younger people and the rest of the population gets disengaged into politics. It's just all this talk about, like, economics and things, which I understand is really important. But in order to get that that population engaged, you need to get things through, like, say, gay marriage, climate change policy.
Okay, I'll just quickly go to Daniel Andrews. You were going to jump in there.
Well, I think this notion that a plebiscite after the election, so a special election just on whether the Marriage Act should treat people equally, you know, I don't know that that's necessarily the greatest thing going around. I think that's going to be a very divisive, potentially spiteful debate. And we've seen just in recent weeks with people attacking programs like Safe Schools that actually work. They work, they save lives. These subliminal, often quite loud messages to, particularly to young gay men and women, gender questioning, same-sex attracted young people and some older, that somehow there's something wrong with them. Now, there's no good to be had from that. We didn't have a plebiscite to change the Marriage Act under John Howard to say a man and a woman and no one else, a man and a woman. Why do we need to have a separate standalone election with all the bitterness and spite that will come from that?
All right. Okay, thank you. We've got a question on another, we could say another issue which has been raised a little bit, but let's hear again from Christine Nguyen.
In 2009, Malcolm Turnbull lost leadership of his own party when he crossed the floor in favour of Labor's emissions trading scheme. In this instance, we saw a man who was willing to stand up to his own party in support of his own views. 6 years later, and 6 months into his new role as Prime Minister, we have not seen any substantive change or progress on the issue of climate change. The record-breaking temperatures of this recent month should be a wake-up call to our politicians. It's time to put climate change back onto the national agenda. I pose this question to the panel. How can Malcolm Turnbull take control of his own party and affect progress on issues that Australia really needs?
Elizabeth Proust, I'll start with you there.
I'm not going to make a political comment on that, Christine, but I think climate change, certainly in general conversation and within companies, is very much on the agenda. I said some time ago, I don't know anybody who doesn't believe that climate change isn't real. It is happening, and you've talked about some recent events. I think that, Josh, you want to obviously talk about Paris and what happened there, but I think it's not been as obvious as some other issues in recent times, but I sense that it's still perhaps not towards the top of the political agenda, but I know in the business community it's very much a part of how we do business.
And is the business community satisfied with the way in which this government, Malcolm Turnbull in particular, has handled this issue?
I think on that and on the innovation statement that Josh also referred to, I think there's some of the things that give business confidence that we are moving in the right direction.
Jackie Lambie, I haven't heard from you for a little while. I'll bring you in on that issue.
Yeah, look, we can't stop climate change. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to prepare for climate change. That means making sure that our SES is out there really well stacked. Our emergency services are out there. They're really stacked up as well. Voluntary National Service certainly look at doing that. The other thing is I have no problems with an ETS. However, I'm not prepared to go into those agreements until our other trading partners are doing the same thing. Otherwise, we're the ones that are going to be putting out like we did last time, and others aren't contributing, and therefore it's costing us more. But you know what? I won't. When it comes to climate change, what I won't have is pensioners paying more for their electricity. Okay, because that's not on.
Josh Frydenberg.
Well, there is a huge amount happening with the government's approach to mitigating carbon footprint. The target we took to Paris, which was to reduce our emissions by 26 to 28% on 2005 levels by 2030, saw the second highest target taken to Paris on a per capita basis. So it was extremely significant. Now, how are we doing it? We have an emissions reduction fund which is looking for the lowest cost abatement. It's actually a market-based mechanism where we go out to businesses and we say, if you reduce your emissions below business as usual, we'll incentivise you to do that. We have billions of dollars of your money going to support new renewable technology through the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and through ARENA. We have a national productivity plan to boost energy efficiency by 40% over the next few years. These are very significant initiatives. Now, I go around the world in my role as Energy Minister, and I'm engaging with other countries and other leaders. And they have acknowledged that under Malcolm Turnbull there has been a significant change, and that these policies that we have in place, whether it's around renewable energies or elsewhere, are quite significant. And just finally, it might also surprise you to know that nearly 15% of Australian households have solar panels on their roofs. That's the highest number of solar panels on people's roofs per capita anywhere in the world. I mean, we are taking up this renewable energy in large amounts. It's working and reducing our carbon footprint, and it is being acknowledged through the world.
Oh, do you know what? Can I just ask something? So while you're on that, can you promise these people here, when it comes to the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and ARENA, you have no intentions in the future of wiping them out?
Because they are actually alternative triggers for a double dissolution, because you have attempted to do that, your government.
And Malcolm Turnbull, I think, made quite clear at his press conference that that was not the focus for us.
OK. Daniel Andrews, briefly.
Well, we had a chance a little while ago to have a proper feed-in tariff arrangement in relation to renewable energy, and the federal parliament, not just the government, but the federal parliament didn't do the right thing. We wanted an opportunity to be able to top that up and to have our own schemes. You know, for me, this is about, there is some urgency. You've only got to get the briefings from all the emergency services heads that I do. We've just had a really long, hot, dry and dangerous bushfire season. It came much earlier. All of these things are very real, and we all confront them in different ways. The most important thing in some respects is that this is ultimately about jobs. And if we get this right, this is the innovation, this is the agility that the Prime Minister talks a very good game on, but needs to do a lot more in terms of delivering real outcomes. And I think the states and territories are prepared to work with him, but we need to see more than fine speeches on this.
OK, let's move to a fresh topic. Remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A, send a tweet using the hashtags FactCheck and Quanda, and keep an eye on our Twitter account for fact checks. The next question comes from Deborah Harrison.
Following last week's riots in Melbourne and the government's response that this sluggish behaviour will not be tolerated, a lot of commentary suggests that integration is the key to accept and stop this kind of behaviour. Daniel Andrews, I'd like to know how the Victorian government will go about integrating these gangs and ensuring that myself and my family won't have to live in a city that has these horrible sorts of events.
Look, Deborah, it was a horrible event, and I was pretty clear in the aftermath of it that none of us accept that. That's not something that can be excused, and let's not make any excuses for the behaviour that we saw. Some crimes can be properly explained, but none of them can be excused, and we should be really clear about that. There are some drivers, I think, behind some of this. When you've got 40–50% youth unemployment rates in some parts of our city and state, when you've got some groups, and I want to be clear about this, Deborah, there's not one particular cultural group. There were people of lots of different backgrounds. Their common feature was not their migrant background, the language they speak at home, their conduct, as appalling as it was, that's what linked them, that was the common feature. We need to be tough on this, and I've said that Graham Ashton, the Victorian Chief Commissioner of Police, will get any and all resources and powers that he needs to smash this gang culture, but we've got to do it in a very Victorian way, if I can say this, and at the same time engage properly with those young people, give them in their life and their journey a sense of hope, the skills, the training, the employment opportunities, the engagement, if you like. We're doing a lot of that. You know, we don't invest in TAFE just for the fun of it. We do it because it's really important so that everyone can have a pathway. We invest in lots of targeted programs. Our diversity is our great strength, in fact, probably our greatest strength. I don't like the term, I'm not one that uses that kind of integration talk. What I would say, though, everyone needs to have a sense of hope and purpose, but also people have to know with absolute certainty, if you choose to break the law, then you will feel the full force of the law. I think we can do both those things at once.
Just to clarify this, are you saying this is not an issue to do with integration?
No, well, I don't think it is at all. I think there are issues around economic connection, if you like. Some of these kids, and they were from many different cultural backgrounds. That's just the fact. The common theme was their conduct, and it wasn't done in the name of their faith or their culture or their background, if you like. It was a choice. No one had to do it. It was a choice. And the vast majority of people that have come from a war-torn part of the world, the vast majority of people who have had disadvantage in their life don't behave that way. So let's be careful not to excuse this by rushing to all the things we have to do. Yes, there are important things the government can do. One of them is to back police to make sure that there is a very strong signal sent that if you behave that way, then you will regret behaving that way. And then let's, in a sophisticated sense, get the other policies right: education, training, engagement, so that everyone's got hope and purpose in their life to make the contribution that everyone can.
OK, we've got another question on this. It's from a slightly different perspective. We'll go to that and hear from the rest of the panel. It's from Aoife Nicholson.
Are we as society so focused on race that we are forgetting another commonality between the perpetrators of this act of gang violence and almost all other instances of gang violence in Australia? All of the gang members appeared to be male. Does Australian culture have a problem with how young men are taught to mediate their disagreements?
Clementine Ford.
I was thinking exactly that when Daniel was answering the previous question, was that for me words like integration are just a dog whistle to inspire racism in people and to excuse racism. And yet if you do say something like the other commonality is the fact that they're all men, and in fact that's a much more prevalent commonality amongst gang violence and amongst thug-like behaviour, if you want to call it that. It's probably the incorrect word to use. But there's a backlash against identifying it as coming from masculinity and coming from a very specific form of toxic masculinity as well. Obviously, men aren't born being violent, but there is something, I think, in the society that we live in which breeds a sense of entitlement, which breeds a sense of retaliation, and which also, in Australia, there's evidence to suggest that men's violence is a problem. You know, so often women are told to protect themselves in certain ways. You know, don't walk down this street, don't wear these clothes, as a form of victim blaming to project the cause of violence onto the victims of it. But actually, the people who are at most risk on the streets are other men from men's violence. So I think that, and one of the things that I try and do is to talk about the problem of men's violence, not to demonise men, but to think about how we can, as a community, look for solutions to actually, as Daniel said, give men not only a sense of purpose, but also remind them that actually this entitlement that has been fed to them by, I'm going to use the word patriarchy here, it scares some people, but the entitlement that has been fed to them by living in a patriarchy is actually unhealthy, and it's not helping men, it's not helping anyone who's victimised by men's violence, and it's really the elephant in the room that very few people are willing to talk about.
Jackie Lambie, I'll bring you in here. The riots, we've got two different perspectives on what the problem is. One is a question about integration, one about whether this is a problem intrinsically with men. What do you say?
Well, first of all, we do need federal laws which target organised criminal gangs, but I'll tell you what, the last few weeks, both on the news and on YouTube, I've watched teenage girls out there beating the crap out of each other. So it isn't just with male. OK, I can tell you now, I walked through the Kmart Plaza in Burnie on Saturday. I'd walked out of a shop and I could hear running feet and a heap of yelling. There were 5 kids, probably between the ages of 16 to 18. Something had happened outside shopping centre. Someone had run in for safety, the rest ran in, and I tell you what, I had old people standing around and young kids, and these 4 or 5 teenagers were about to belt each other. Now, you know, for me, I had no choice. I've got to walk through that and stop that, which I was able to do. I was very, very lucky this time to calm it down. So I don't think it's just about organised crime. Our young people out there don't have jobs, OK? They've lost their way. They've lost respect for themselves. They've lost respect for society. How many times can they get a knockback from jobs? If you don't give them jobs, then this is what you're going to create. You've got to break the cycle. And this is what leads them into these organised criminal groups in the first place, OK? Because they feel lost, they want somebody to take them in, and then this is how they're driven in there. So really, we need to provide these kids. If you're not learning, earning or serving, then I am concerned about you. And they are the only 3 options that these teenagers and those anywhere between 17 and 25, because they seem to be the biggest group unemployed right now, and we need to do something. And we're not providing extra jobs out there, and that's the problem, and that's why it's chaotic.
Yeah, I actually want to hear from Elizabeth. I'll come back to you in a minute. Elizabeth, If there were going to be a series of, if you were actually going to rank the big issues in this election, the ones that may not get spoken about as often as they should, youth unemployment would be right up there, wouldn't it? Maybe number 1 or 2.
It certainly should be, and certainly on the fringes of our cities and some of our regional cities, the unemployment nationally might be 5.8%, but for young people it is very high, more than double that, I think. And that means that the opportunities that we've had to work and to earn and all of the things that go with that are not available to too many young people. And you know, TAFE has to be part of that, but then so does growing the economy so that everybody shares in that, and jobs are available. And as jobs disappear, and they will in this state, car manufacturing industry in the next few years, but we have to be able to ensure that the environment is right so that the new jobs, and they're many of them, hundreds of thousands of them in recent times, have been created in financial services and services generally. But we have to ensure that young people have the training and the skills to take those jobs on.
Josh Frydenberg, Daniel, I'll come back to you in a second. Josh Frydenberg, if we're going into an election campaign, it would be quite comforting, given what we're hearing here, to know that one of the first or second sentences spoken by every campaigning politician from the Prime Minister on down was about the national crisis in youth unemployment. Any chance that might happen?
I think it's an absolute key focus for us. We are pleased that the number is actually coming down, and you know, it's amazing to hear Daniel talk about 50 to 60% unemployment in some communities. I know some parts of Australia, you know, youth unemployment is above 20%. So it does need to be a bipartisan approach to getting youth unemployment down. I think the events in Victoria were absolutely appalling, and I think, you know, the zero tolerance that we need to take to this is very important. I don't think it's merely an issue of race, although I have noticed people, for example, in the Salvation Army have raised challenges that they're finding with new immigrants in terms of, you know, how to provide for them in new surrounds and when they come from war-torn backgrounds. But you know, this is a national problem. It's a bipartisan challenge, and I think we've all got a lot of work to do.
Okay, let's move on. The next question is on a subject we already started talking about earlier. That's the Safe Schools program. The question's from Carter Smith.
Hi, I'm a queer student, and as thus I have many queer friends, sexually and gender. The notion that the Safe Schools program is radical gender theory is absolutely ridiculous, and what Clementine said earlier about young queer people having a high rate of suicide and mental health is absolutely true. Trust me, I see it. I'm very proud to see my Premier standing up for the rights of LGBT people and standing up for the Safe Schools program, and I just want to know that he will continue to fight for that in the face of adversity, and what he will do to ensure that people are educated on these issues and also that kids are kept safe.
Daniel Andrews. Can I just say, we still have a few questions to get through, so we can keep our answers tight.
I couldn't put it any better than Carter did. This program works, it saves lives, and I've sat and listened to so many young people who've told me exactly that story, and people who are a little older, Carter, and they say, gee, I wish this program had been there for me when I was at school. It works, it's here to stay. If the federal government wants to tinker with it and compromise it, we will fund it fully and deliver it properly in every government secondary school across our state, no questions asked.
So, can I just confirm what you're actually saying here, because the Federal Education Minister is not saying he's going to get rid of the program, but simply to change it and make sure it only goes to secondary schools. Are you going to fund it for primary schools?
Our commitment at the election last year, sorry, in 2014, was to roll it out into every secondary school, and that's exactly what we're doing. And we'll continue that until we've got every school running this program, and every school is a safe place where everyone gets treated equally and where, you know, who you are is good enough. No more, no less. You're valued, respected, and you're safe. Let me talk about very quickly one of the changes, this notion that you can only participate in the program if your parents have said you can. It's very difficult for some young people to talk to their parents about these sorts of issues. And the notion that you've got to, according to the federal government, you've got to come out to your classmates with no support, you've got to come out to mum and dad with no backing, no proper support, in order to be part of this program. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. It works. Why would you Why would you do this? Why would you tamper with something that's actually saving lives?
We'll come back to Carter in a moment, but first we want to hear from the government as to why it's changed.
Well, I mean, I couldn't help but be moved by Carter's comments, and I totally understand the amount of self-harm and mental illness that we see in young people with gender identity issues, and it's a very serious challenge. That being said, the government has identified some problems in this particular program. It's got quite a controversial concept, and accepting the fluid nature of gender. Now, that goes beyond boys and girls to talk in the program itself as saying gender is something that someone accepts themselves, that someone self-selects is the words that they use. The materials in the program says we shouldn't use the terms boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen anymore. We should use gender-neutral terms. Now, Simon Birmingham has done, I think, an extremely good job of reviewing this program and announcing some changes. Now, his changes are changing some of the content, getting more parental engagement, getting more peer review, and ensuring that the website links are actually to organisations that receive state or federal funding. And I would ask Daniel Andrews, before he rushes out and goes beyond even what the Safe Schools Coalition itself has asked for, because it said this program should be optional, you're now saying it should be mandatory, and you've gone much further than they've even asked for. What do you have? What problems do you...
Having introduced it back in 2010, we're not rushing, mate. We've been on this for a long time because it works. Because it works.
What problems do you have with getting more parental engagement? And I actually think, Daniel, it was completely outrageous of you, right, to go out and criticise...
I've committed the outrage here.
This is exactly right. To go out and...
You don't believe this, mate.
No, to criticise parents or politicians...
You're not in the Corey Bernardi camp. No, you're just not.
Hang on. To criticise parents or politicians who raise questions about this program. You called them bigots. You called them homophobes. Well, that is not preaching the tolerance that this program is designed.
Hang on. It's not about tolerance.
Can we just
about tolerance.
It's about
tolerating gay people.
Just pause for a moment.
It's not about tolerating people.
Just hang on for 1 moment, if you wouldn't mind. I just want to quickly hear from our questioner, and then I'll come back to you. Go ahead. You've been listening to this, Carter, and I'm just interested in what you think about the kind of nature of the debate.
I think the problem is politicians are using young, innocent, in-pain children as political bullets. That is unacceptable. Kids are being hurt when they hear this entire debate about, oh, well, no, we can't really talk about that and that's not really safe. It's still creating this idea that they are different, that they are wrong, that they are not being accepted. That is driving kids to hurt themselves. That is driving kids to kill themselves. I know that no one wants that, so I just think it's ridiculous that this debate has to keep going on. I actually do believe that this should be mandatory in schools because most kids aren't bigoted. No one is born bigoted. They learn bigotry. So when this kind of debate happens and this kind of pushback against natural human rights occurs, I think it is absolutely ridiculous and it's detrimental to kids' health. So why does this have to continue? Why does the government have to push back?
Okay, hang on, Clementine.
I can't do any better than that.
Okay, Clementine, briefly, and then Josh.
Thank you very much, Carter, for a start. It's really nice to hear from someone who is actually part of the LGBT crew on this issue, as opposed to a panel of people who are not necessarily connected to it. Secondly, sorry, Josh, not to pick on you, but it's not gender identity issues, because the language does matter. Issues implies that there's something wrong, which is actually what Safe Schools is trying to challenge. I believe as well that the Safe Schools program should be mandatory, and this is what it comes down to, is that absolutely nobody is going to be hurt by teaching kindness, by teaching not tolerance, tolerance is the wrong word, but by teaching love, by teaching an embrace of diversity, and by actually teaching that people come in all sorts of different kinds of packages, and that there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with trans and gender diverse kids, and there's nothing wrong with LGBT kids. But the very last thing is that reducing it so that it's only introduced in secondary schools, it makes the assumption that these this awareness only transpires when you enter secondary school. It's not. You know, we've got kids who are very, very young who are affirming and being supported to affirm their gender identities from a young age, who need to be supported by the school systems that they're entering, who need to be surrounded by love and acceptance. And the other thing as well is we've got kids who aren't challenged by living in a transphobic society, who want to be supportive allies.
OK, Clementine, first of all, it has to be said that it is only in a tiny number of primary schools, so it hasn't been taken up by a lot of primary schools.
I think it should be mandatory everywhere.
All
I think that adults would actually benefit from having this training.
Josh, I'll bring you back in, but we want to get to another question, so if you can briefly respond.
Look, as an anti-bullying program, we need those, right? We need to build awareness of the situations that you raise. Nobody's disagreeing with that. But when you actually read through these materials, where they ask you for they give examples of kids in year 7 and 8 asked to pretend that they are aliens from another planet who come here and they're genderless. And they're asked questions about what would they do without any genitals. Now, that's in year 7 and 8. Now, I bet you all those parents that Daniel wants to subject to this program want to have a say as to whether it's age appropriate or indeed appropriate at all. That's a debate we haven't had, right? And that's the questions that have been asked. Not about an anti-bullying, not about awareness, but about the age-appropriate nature of an agenda that seems to have gone beyond anti-bullying.
Right, let's hear from our other panellist, Jackie Lambie.
Oh, good on you for standing up. I'll tell you what, mate, it is a reality. It is happening. Let's talk about it. That's what's missing. Don't go... See, that's the trouble with you Conservatives. It's happening, mate. It's happening. Bring it to the surface. Let's discuss it, all right? So everybody's comfortable with it. And if that takes it, well, why not? We've got kids out there at 10 years of age with an ice pipe in their mouth. So please don't tell me these things aren't going on. Let's get a reality check here.
Elizabeth Proust.
I support the program. My knowledge is a slightly different area. I'm the Deputy Chairman of the Catholic Church's Truth, Justice and Healing Council, which is dealing with the Royal Commission into Sexual Abuse of Children, and I've been working on that now for a few years with my colleagues. And having children safe and making sure that something like this happened in my church and in other churches and other institutions, you can't say will never happen again, but minimise the chances of it never ever happening again, is something I support very strongly, and anything that we can do to ensure that all of our children are safe, we must do.
Josh Frydenberg's making the argument the program went too far, essentially.
I don't know the details of the program, but we have to sign up to having our children and our grandchildren safe in our schools, in our other institutions.
I'll give you the final word.
The program works.
Good on you.
Simple as that. Simple as that.
And that was a brief final word, but it's all we need because that's all we have time for. Please thank our panel, Daniel Andrews, Elizabeth Proust, Jackie Lambie, Josh Frydenberg and Clementine Ford. Thank you very much. Now, thank you. Next Monday on Q&A, we talk a little bit about innovation and Australia's innovation future. Well, there's never been a more exciting time to spruik innovation policies. So what do the major parties have to offer? Joining the panel next week, the government's point man on innovation, Wyatt Roy, the opposition spokesman on digital innovation and startups, Ed Husick, the founder of the Innovation Clearinghouse, Sandy Plunkett, quantum physicist and nanotech researcher Michael Biersick, and young entrepreneur Holly Ransom. Until next week's Q&A, good night.